My grandfather taught me to look forward, always going forward. At the same time, to look back, to reflect. I now take you back to my university days, Bombay, India. The year is 1978 to May 1980. My international house hostel was 5 to 6 minutes walk to the famous Marine Drive area. Every Monday to Friday on a daily basis, I would take a short break and have a 10-minute walk on Marine Drive. Little did I know, as I walked and looked at the Arabian Ocean and the waves hitting the rocks, that it was only 15 minutes from here that my grandfather, Kandubai Dajibai Naik, set sail on a second-class ticket via the Indian Ocean to reach Beira, the Portuguese colony called Mozambique. The year was 1922 December, and he was only 22 years old. He came to Southern Rhodesia, like many others, from Gujarat as a new second-class settler. We always looked as all Rhodesian whites, who were all called racious. Yet there were these small percentages or small numbers who understood the issues and who stood for the majority rule, those who stood against the white philosophy and ideology. Here is a poem I found while researching on this documentary by Liz C. Bedford, a white Rhodesian, born in Rhodesia. I was born in a land where the skies are so blue, African sunsets flamed bright golden hue. Communities were strong, we cared, we shared. Problems rallied us, loads together we bared. I'm proud of my heritage, my life, my homeland. For those not born there will not understand. If we teach our children the values we choose, they will follow and walk in the prints of our shoes. Displaced as a nation, no fault of our own, our children's seed in foreign lands are sown. No one can take away our dignity and pride, for that's been cherished and nurtured inside. In our hearts and our souls, we are all kith and kin, for we are Africans, regardless of our color of skin. So hold your head high, be proud and true, for this will continue just because of you. Let's take a quick look at how my grandfather landed up as a new settler in Southern Rhodesia. My grandfather, Kandubai Dajibai Naik, was very different from the majority of early Gujarati settlers. He did not come for gold or a better life. He chose Southern Rhodesia as the best alternative, or as we can say, a Hobson's choice. He chose Southern Rhodesia because a family friend gave him a free ticket on short-term loan for second-class berths travel from Bombay port to Beira port. According to family stories, my grandfather's main reason turned out to be very unique and desperate. It was anger and rejection. His was a story of rejection by his family, community, his caste group, and the education board in his area. As a primary school teacher in 1921 in the Supa area, my grandfather as a teacher took a stand and asked the school board, the community, and the leaders in the village to allow untouchable children, a caste system that deems these people were impure and less than human. My grandfather as a Gujarati teacher stood his ground and decided to look the other way. His human rights stand prosecuted his life, and he had no other choice but to run out of India as fast and as far as possible. My grandfather's stand at that time in this Indian village reminded me of the same stand once taken by Mahatma Gandhi during his time as a lawyer and as a freedom fighter in India. He was also against the whole caste system and the treatment of untouchables.
1869 to 1948. The services he rendered for the reform of the caste system and upliftment of the depressed classes will be remembered till posterity. He condemned untouchability in the strongest possible terms. According to him, untouchability had no sanction whatsoever in the Hindu scriptures. Again, according to him, temple entry is the most potent factor in eroding the evil of untouchability. Mahatma Gandhi suggested the application of non-violent methods for the eradication of untouchability and for the right to temple entry. Mahatma Gandhi undertook fast unto death when the British government, by the Communal Award of 1932, tried to separate. He founded the Harijan Sevak Sangh in 1932 for the uplift of Harijans.
It was 11th November 1965 that the Rhodesian Party declared United Declaration of Independence from Britain. We were sitting in my grandfather's room with a big old-style radio, waiting patiently for the speech by Honorable Prime Minister then, Ian Douglas Smith. I was 9 years old.
We, the government of Rhodesia, in humble submission to Almighty God, who controls the destinies of nations, conscious that the people of Rhodesia have always shown unswerving loyalty and devotion to Her Majesty the Queen, and earnestly praying that we and the people of Rhodesia will not be hindered in our determination to continue exercising our undoubted right to demonstrate the same loyalty and devotion, and seeking to promote the common good so that the dignity and freedom of all men may be assured, do, by this proclamation, adopt, enact, and give to the people of Rhodesia the Constitution annexed hereto. God save the Queen.
Yogesh Naik was born on January 12, 1956, in the city of Bulawayo, Southern Rhodesia, into a Gujarati family of modest means. The Naiks were lower middle class, and it wasn't until 1973 that they could afford a car. Growing up, Yogesh was taught a version of history that glorified the British Empire, where Cecil Rhodes was credited with discovering Rhodesia. But by the time he reached high school, he began questioning these narratives. He realized history had been written through the lens of colonial power, designed to justify British imperialism. Yogesh was born into the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, under the leadership of Prime Ministers Godfrey Huggins and later Roy Welensky. His childhood home, located at 57 Jameson Street, was in the designated Indian residential zone, his first experience with racial segregation. From his earliest school days, racial barriers were deeply ingrained in daily life. Indians and coloreds were allowed to mix within their own spaces, but interaction with black children was limited to weekends when they stayed with domestic staff. White children, on the other hand, remained entirely separate, attending their own schools, living in different neighborhoods, and moving in social circles that were completely out of reach. At school, Yogesh noticed that no Asian or colored teachers were permitted to work in black or white institutions. Some white teachers carried themselves with an air of superiority, reinforcing the divisions of the time. By the final year of primary school, Yogesh made a quiet but firm decision. He refused to play on white sports teams. It was his personal protest, one he never spoke about, even to his friends. The segregation extended far beyond school. At the cinema, designated seating zones separated Asians and colorids, while black audiences were denied entry altogether. The same policies applied to restaurants and sports clubs. Seeing signs that read, "Reserved for whites only," filled Yogesh with deep frustration. So much so that they haunted his dreams at night. Yet, alongside the pain, a fire was lit within him. He began devouring literature on racial justice, reading about the Pan-African movement, socialism, and the struggles of leaders like Gandhi and Mandela. He was deeply moved by Mandela's decades-long imprisonment and Gandhi's acts of defiance, from the Salt March to the burning of pass permits in South Africa. By 1965, the so-called emergency powers further tightened the government's grip, suppressing free speech and granting sweeping authority to detain political activists. But instead of being silenced, Yogesh became even more determined. At just 17, he joined the ZAPU Youth Wing, led by Joshua Ankomo, and took an active role in the fight against racial discrimination. He authored a 25-page report for the Commission of Racial Discrimination, an extraordinary effort for someone so young. In 1974, he was elected as a committee member of ZAPU's Youth Wing in Bulawayo. However, his tenure was cut short after just 6 months when he was forced to flee to India. By this time, the authorities had taken notice. The Central Intelligence Organization, CIO, and the Bulawayo police were watching him closely. His first major act of defiance came at a public meeting of the Rhodesian Front, where Prime Minister Ian Smith was speaking. During the Q&A session, Yogesh openly challenged Smith's infamous claim that black rule will never happen in 1,000 years. He confronted the government's discrimination and lack of political freedom, making himself a target in the process. But the final straw came when he refused to serve in the Rhodesian army. At a commission review, he stood firm, declaring that Rhodesia was not recognized by the world, and he would not fight for an unjust cause. The repercussions were swift. Facing imminent danger, Yogesh fled through Botswana and arrived in Bombay, India, as a student refugee. It would take several long years before he could return. But in May 1981, Yogesh stepped back onto Zimbabwean soil, no longer a colony, but a free nation.
Let's now look at this YouTube video on Southern Rhodesian history from 1923 to 1965, when Ian Smith declared UDI.
In our previous video, we had looked at the unrecognized state of Zimbabwe Rhodesia. Today we'll be looking at the British colony of Southern Rhodesia, which had previously been under the administration of Cecil John Rhodes' British South Africa Company, which would eventually become Rhodesia and temporarily revert back to the British colony of Southern Rhodesia following the transition to Zimbabwe. Now, you may be asking yourself, how did Southern Rhodesia become a British colony? What was life like in Southern Rhodesia? And so many more questions related to that. Well, today we'll be answering all of that. So let's jump into today's video, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So as usual, let's start with a brief background to the events prior to the establishment of Southern Rhodesia. Before it had been established, it had been referred to as South Zambezia, and during the scramble for Africa, which started in the 1880s, which in short can be defined as the invasion, annexation, division, and colonization of most of Africa by 7 Western European powers during a short period roughly between 1881 and 1914. During this time, Cecil Rhodes, a British-born South African businessman and politician, had envisioned annexing a piece of territory that would connect the Cape of Good Hope and Cairo, essentially connecting the southern and northern tips of Africa, and a railway to link the two, also known as the Cape to Cairo Red Line, and the area would be referred to as Rhodesia from 1895. However, this vision was hindered by various factors such as the Boer republics, the Kingdom of Matabele land, whose people had migrated from the south. They owned most of the land and subjugated various Shona groups. Matabele land was ruled by Indebele king Lobengula, son of Umzilakazi, as well as many other factors hindering his vision. However, due to having mining rights from King Lobengula to dig for gold in October 1888 and another for land in 1891, as King Lobengula only allowed this to occur so as to secure money and weaponry for the Matabele, in addition to a pledge that any people who came to dig would be considered as living in his kingdom. However, this was not the case at all, and he was essentially hoodwinked into ceding land and mineral rights to Rhodes, as he did not fully understand what he was signing, as he was illiterate in English, which was normal at the time, and he would use missionaries and other European guests who would frequent his crowd to draw up and interpret documents for him. Sadly, he only realized after signing the documents that the country had essentially been sold, and that the oral promises made by Rhodes were not enforceable. This also ensuring the exclusion of German, Portuguese, and Boer territorial threats to the British possession in southern Africa, and that Rhodes' plan to connect the Cape to Cairo by telegraph and railway would be accomplished essentially without costing the British taxpayer a penny, thus creating a common phrase that Lobengula sold Zimbabwe for a bag of sugar. Due to this, the administration of what would become Rhodesia was chartered by Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom and Empress of India to Rhodes British South Africa Company in 1889. Although the company was set up to run the territory as a commercial venture with the power to form banks, own and manage land, trade with local chiefs, and raise its own mounted infantry force, which would become to be known as the British South Africa Police, BSAP, who protected settlers exploring the area as well as playing a central role in both the First and Second Matabele Wars, which were both bloodbaths, honestly speaking. The British High Commission for South Africa was responsible for its overall supervision from 1898, although the company continued its activities, particularly in commercial agriculture and mining. In exchange for all of this, Rhodes British South Africa Company had to respect the laws enacted by existing African rulers and uphold free trade within its borders. However, the full extent to which this actually happened can be seen to have not happened on the way envisioned. However, military force had also been used, and it was another bloodbath in itself, honestly speaking. Rhodes was now in possession of vast amounts of territory divided by the Zambezi River, which would be renamed Rhodesia to honor the man who had been a key player in British expansion into southern Africa, which would run from 1890 to 1924, with the land south of the Zambezi River being called Southern Rhodesia, which attracted many settlers, which is now Zimbabwe, and the area north respectively being called Northwestern and Northeastern Rhodesia, and would later be combined to form Northern Rhodesia in 1911, now called Zambia. And through treaties, concessions such as the Root Concession and Moffat Treaty, these colonies, like many others, oppressed the black majority, with white settlers owning much of the land and wealth. In 1917, the Responsible Government Association, RGA, was formed. This party sought self-government for Southern Rhodesia within the empire, just as Britain had previously granted responsible government to its colonies such as Australia, before said colonies would eventually receive full dominion. The RGA mainly opposed incorporation into the Union of South Africa. As legislative power in Southern Rhodesia grew, it gradually transferred from complete company rule to effective self-government by growing the number of white settlers, and the remainder of land owned by the British Crown in relation to already private land owned was sold to the white settlers. In 1922, a referendum in Southern Rhodesia chose responsible government within the British Empire over incorporation into the Union of South Africa, with the company charter being revoked and Southern Rhodesia becoming a self-governing British colony. Southern Rhodesia was officially annexed by the British Empire on the 12th of September 1923.
The Indian presence in what is now Zimbabwe dates back to 1890. Some findings have shown the similarities of gold mining techniques carried out in Southern Rhodesia during ancient periods with Indian ones. A brass cup of Hindu workmanship dated to 14th and 15th centuries has been found in Zimbabwe. During the colonial period, Indian plantation workers from South Africa crossed the border via the Limpopo border areas. A voluntary wave of Indian migrants also came at the same time from the east, made up mostly of Gujarati men crossing the Indian Oceans to look for new opportunities. These early settlers landed in Beira, Mozambique, a Portuguese colony at the time. The first Indian settlers from South Africa who crossed via South Africa through the Limpopo were South Indians. Most were from the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Many of these first Indian settlers from or via South Africa worked as cooks, laundry services and general labor with the coming of the pioneer column to Southern Rhodesia. Further immigration was restricted in 1924 when the colony became a self-governed colony of the United Kingdom. The next year, entry of Indian migrants was restricted to wives and minor children of existing residents. Some exceptions were made for teachers and priests. Indians in Zimbabwe have never made up more than 1% of the country's population. By 1911, their numbers were about 2,912 as compared to white settler population being about 23,606. By 1969, Asians still numbered only 8,965, while Europeans were 228,000. The first Indian settlers worked in as traders, market gardeners, and laundrymen. They were eventually driven out of these places to urban spaces by the Land Appointment Act of 1930. Narendra Mora, a very old family friend, in his research paper on the Jivan family, gave the following facts. A census carried out in 2016 recorded an estimated 9,000 Zimbabwean citizens. Around 500 of these were in professional jobs. According to Narendra Mora, by the beginning of the third decade of colonization, Asians were to be found in 4 main occupation areas: agriculture, domestic services, commerce, and industry. Most Indians in Southern Rhodesia were Gujarati. According to the 1921 census, there were 612 Hindus, 231 Muslims, 1 Parsi, and 113 as classified as others. A census carried out in 2016 recorded an estimated 9,000 Zimbabwean citizens. Around 500 of these were in professional jobs such as computer software, accounting, and banking. Pimji Ranchodji Naik, who was born in 1879 in Gujarat, India, was the first Indian Gujarati to establish a trading license at Amtali in 1898. Naik would go on to open branches in Gweru, Sarugwe, and what is now called Harare. We end our series 1 and will rejoin the interesting life and settler experiences of Bimji R. Naik in series 2.